Hey guys, it's John from That DIY Couple. Today I'm doing a video about how I got into Yale University as an undergrad. I was asked the question recently by somebody, how did I get into Yale? And it's a question that I haven't thought about in a long time, but I realized that it might be of interest to people, particularly some people watching this channel, because I've done a lot of videos about college admissions and interviewing and all of that. So if you guys don't know, I am a graduate of the class of 2008 at Yale, which means that I got admitted in 2004. By the time I'm recording this video, I've been out of Yale for about 12 years. I've been interviewing people for about 10 years for Yale as a volunteer. I interview about 10 people per year. So that's about 100 people that I've interviewed in total. So I've seen good applicants, I've seen bad applicants in my opinion. I want to say 5 or 6 people that I've interviewed over the years have actually gone to Yale, which is a little bit lower than the acceptance rate. But I know some things about the Yale admissions process, and I know quite a lot less than you might expect given the fact that I went there and that I am an interviewer, but I'd like to share to you my story in the hopes that it might be interesting and it might help you. The first thing to know is that I don't really know why I got into Yale. They don't tell you when you get into Yale, this is why you got in. At least they didn't tell me. So like pretty much everybody else that I know at Yale except for Shannon, who will be doing a video on the same topic and has a different story than I do, so please keep tuned for her video about the same thing. Except for Shannon, basically everybody else who I know got into Yale was very, very suspicious and hesitant and uncertain about their application, and when they got in, a lot of people said, oh, this must be a mistake. So the first thing to know about how I got into Yale is that I really don't know the answer. I have some suspicions, and I'll get into that in this video, but nobody really knows. The only people that know are the admissions officers at Yale, and obviously they're not going to really tell you, because if they told you, it would kind of make it easier for other people to get in that might not be perhaps worthy in their eyes of getting in. The second thing to know about me getting into Yale is that yes, I did have good grades and good test scores. I think that that's a prerequisite to getting into a lot of good schools. That's not to say that if you have not perfect grades and not perfect test scores, you can't get in. I didn't have that. I didn't get a perfect score on the SAT, which was the standardized test that I took at the time. It was out of 1,600. I think I got something like 1510 or something like that. I actually don't really remember, but something in that range, so not a perfect score. Don't know if I was the #1 student in my class. My high school didn't rank kids in that way. I do know that I was in the top 10%. My high school class was about 100 people, so that was like the top 10. I sort of suspect that I was maybe in the top like 2 or 3 students at least, but I don't really know for certain. But definitely good grades and doing well on standardized tests was a part of my application, and I don't think if I had done worse on those things, I don't know if I would have gotten into Yale. The third thing is extracurricular activities and being pointy. So if you're not familiar with this concept, there's a difference between being a well-rounded person or applicant to a school and being a pointy person. Pointy person implies that you have one activity or 2 activities that you go really deep into, so you kind of have a point in your interests, whereas a well-rounded person is kind of like a sphere. They do a lot of different things, but maybe they're not really deep in any one given thing. I was definitely a pointier person, so I had a few extracurricular activities that were really unique and that I really played up. And the most important of that, in my opinion, is that I played the bagpipes. So my high school had a very unique program where I got to learn how to play the bagpipes as a student. And then my school also had an after-school program, a band, a pipe and drum corps, where students played the bagpipes and some people played the drums. And we would go to different shows and performances and march around the school, march in parades. We went up to Boston every year to march in that parade. So it was a very unique thing, and I was really good at the bagpipes. I was probably the best bagpiper in my high school for a couple years. My last 2 years of high school, I would say. I was the pipe major of the group, which is kind of like the student elected president. I spent a lot of time doing it. I wrote one of my essays on playing the bagpipes. So I think when a school like Yale looked at my application, they said, look, how many kids out there have a unique activity like this where they play the bagpipes and have also devoted a ton of time and effort and whatever else into it, it's really important to them. There really weren't that many kids like that. In addition to playing the bagpipes, I also had a lot of other interests, some of which were more important than others. I was very geeky and like technologically focused, which I think was important. The idea of being pointy, which is going deep into one particular aspect of whatever it is and showing that you're a real passionate person about it, a real expert in that, I think is really important. And the more unique and interesting that is, I think the better for your application. I think that's what really helped me in my application. The fourth reason why I think I got into Yale was that I believe in my application materials and in my interview, I acted as though school was easy. That's a little bit complicated to say. I don't really know a better way to phrase it, but something that I found in interviewing, and I think is true of my application, was that I didn't spend a lot of time talking about how hard I tried to get into Yale and how hard it was for me to get good grades. I spent a lot of time talking about a lot of non-academic things, and if I did talk about academics, my focus was a lot on the humanities like history and philosophy and literature, but at the same time, I was probably the best physics student in my high school. I took an AP physics course my junior year and then took another AP physics course my senior year, and I was always the best student in all those courses. I took a lot of other like physics competitions, but I didn't really even talk about physics that much in my application to Yale. And I think that had the effect of it saying that, you know, look, I'm so smart that I don't even really care about physics that much, but I happen to be really good at it. That's not true, because I definitely studied a ton for my physics classes, and it was really hard for me to do well, and it was a big focus of mine, but it just didn't come across the way in my application. And a lot of students that I've interviewed, that's kind of the theme that I get. If you can kind of show to a school like Yale, you kind of portray like, I'm so smart, I don't really have to try very hard to do well in class. I almost need to be challenged more at a place like Yale, where I'm going to be, you know, my intellectual capabilities are going to be really at full gear. That's what I think that a school like Yale likes to see, because it shows that you're just a smart person. And obviously the reality might be very different. As I just said, in my case, I studied a ton for all of my classes, including my physics class, and I was super anxious and nervous every time I, took these tests, and it was a big part of my life, but it just didn't come across the way in my application. I focused a lot more in my application on how much I liked the humanities. Being also really good at physics, and I think coming off as though it was kind of like an afterthought for me, I believe was helpful for showing that I was just a really smart kid. The fifth reason why I believe I got into Yale was that I had great recommendations. So I really cultivated relationships with my teachers in high school, throughout my high school career. As I mentioned before, I played the bagpipes, and so my bagpipe teacher was one of my recommenders, and I know that he super loved me, and we had a very close relationship. In fact, we're still friends right now, even many years later. The importance of recommendations can't be understated. If you have a teacher who's going to go really to bat for you, who's going to write a recommendation that says something like, this is one of the best students I've ever seen, or this student is really special, colleges like Yale will read into that and will understand what that means, because obviously teachers write hundreds of recommendations throughout their teaching careers, but for a teacher to say this is the best student I've ever had, or the most special student I've ever had, is really significant. So I would encourage you to go to a teacher that for some reason you've really impressed, or that really likes you. I had another teacher that wrote a recommendation for me. She was actually a religion teacher, or philosophy and religion teacher my senior year, and she would always write comments on my paper about how amazing she thought all of my papers were, and how smart she thought I was, and how great my writing was, and how she was so impressed and so shocked. And even though I didn't really know her that well, I thought, well, if she really likes my writing, she's going to write me a really great recommendation. And obviously I've never read these recommendations, but I can only guess that the recommendations that I got from her, from my bagpipe teacher, and I think one or two other teachers that I did have a very strong relationship with, were really strong, and I think that helped my application. The final thing that I believe was important for me getting into Yale was having a consistent story and a consistent narrative throughout all my application materials. And I talk about this a lot in some of my other videos about interviewing for Yale. I tried very hard for someone reading my application to understand who I was. So I wanted to get across that I was really into bagpipes, that I was really committed to that activity. I wanted to get across that I was really intelligent and smart. So as I said before, I showed that I was doing all these different things, all these different academic subjects, even though I wasn't really trying very hard. And I did that by focusing on the humanities, even though I also showcased how great I was at physics, at science. And I also did that by working really hard in my essays and then in my interview to kind of come across as a kid who was very intellectually curious about a lot of different things. And so I did a lot of different extracurricular activities, but the narrative that I tried to describe was that I'm someone who's really curious intellectually. I conveyed that in my essays. I thought I did a good job in that. And I remember in my interview, I talked about that a lot, about how I was just curious about learning stuff and interested in doing that. One thing to note is that when I got into Yale, the admissions rate was something like 10%, maybe a little bit less than 10%. I think the year that I got in was the first year that it never been below 10%, like in the single digits. I believe most recently the admissions rate has been in the like 6% range. So even in the 12 years since I became admitted, it's become a lot more difficult to get into Yale. And I talk to people from my class all the time about this. They say, look, if I was applying to Yale today, I don't know if I would have gotten in, and I'm going to say that to you. I don't know if I would get in if I had the same application materials today as I did when I applied in 2004. But hopefully this helps to illuminate a little bit my application and how I think I got into Yale. I have other videos about Yale admissions and the interview process. If you're interested in that topic, definitely check them out. If you have questions about it, you can always comment on this video or reach us through email at thatdiycouple@gmail.com. That's in the comments as well. But thank you guys for watching. Until next time, do well and always make things better.